From the very start of Liddy's story, the narrator explains that adventurers always carried old luggage from town, everything from everyday items to precious treasures. While essential for their journey, these items became a burden in battle. Therefore, a porter was an indispensable member of the party. They didn't fight and had no combat skills. Their only job was to carry the team's belongings throughout the entire adventure. To some, porters were unsung heroes, but to others they were merely obscure figures in the background. Such is the life of a porter. Of course, even the hero's party in our story had a porter of their own. The opening scene is an intense battle. The hero, Rozark, shouts at the Demon King, declaring that this will be his end and that they will defeat him for good. After the Demon King was defeated, Liddy joyfully exclaimed that Rozark had done it. Rozark smiled, responding with a firm nod and thanking Liddy for sticking with them until the very end. Liddy said softly that working with everyone was the greatest honor of his life. Liddy then named the rest of the party members: Ignore the Mage, Demoness the Warrior, and Farah the Priestess. Liddy recounted that despite facing seemingly insurmountable hardships, the team had combined their unique strengths to defeat the Demon King. Although Liddy admitted he hadn't contributed anything to the fight, he still congratulated the team on their glorious victory. Demoness then spoke up, telling Liddy not to sell himself short, emphasizing that it was thanks to him that the party was able to give their all against the Demon King. Rozark agreed with Demoness, adding that everything they'd achieved would have been impossible without Liddy. The whole team fought together and defeated the Demon King. Hearing their words, Liddy was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. Seeing this, Rozark asked in surprise if Liddy was injured. Liddy shook his head, explaining that he'd just realized how incredibly lucky he was to have met and journeyed with them. He explained that 5 years ago, he was just a war orphan, but they had taken him in and accepted him as the party's porter. Liddy thanked the team once more, saying he felt truly fortunate to have worked with them. Ignore smiled and said the feeling was mutual. Demoness nodded in agreement with Ignore, and Farah added that Liddy's presence in the group was a blessing to them all. As the group returned together, Rozark asked what everyone would do next, now that the Demon King was defeated. He then suggested they share their plans, just for old time's sake. Ignore answered that she planned to return to her forest, as the experiences she'd gathered on their journey would surely inspire a new breakthrough in her research. Demoness shared that perhaps one day Rozark would find him escorting important people on the road, since many would want protection from a hero's companion. Farah said she would return to the Grand Cathedral because no matter their journey, she was and always would be a devoted servant of her faith. Just then, Rozark grinned and said he bet the team was curious where the hero was heading next. Ignore immediately snapped at him to shut up, asking if Rozark remembered how many times he'd already told them. But despite her nagging, Rozark declared that he was heading to the royal capital, because he had promised to marry the princess as soon as the mission was over. That was the whole reason he'd accepted this dangerous journey in the first place. Rozark continued, his voice dripping with smugness, boasting that not only was the princess stunningly beautiful, but he couldn't wait to find out what she was like in bed. Ignore couldn't help but retort that Rozark was as crude as ever. Farah added that Rozark would be the ideal partner for any young woman, if not for that personality of his. Rozark then turned to Liddy and asked if he wanted to come with him to the royal capital, promising him the honor of becoming the future king's first retainer. Liddy first thanked Rozark for the offer, but then declined, saying he'd made up his mind long ago. He wanted to become an adventurer. Hearing this, the entire party was visibly stunned. Ignore asked, her voice filled with surprise, if Liddy was really sure about this. Demoness, looking tense, urged Liddy not to say he was planning to go alone. Liddy smiled and confirmed that he did, in fact, intend to start his journey as a solo adventurer. He further explained that he understood it was a long road ahead, but his goal was to one day be able to stand as their equal. Demoness replied that he understood the decision, while admitting it would be an incredibly difficult journey. Farah added that it was an honor for Liddy to think so highly of them. Ignore, however, reacted strongly, saying loudly that they had to stop him. Demoness immediately objected, asking how they could be cruel enough to crush his dream. Farah, while agreeing it was cruel, insisted they couldn't let Liddy go through with it. Ignore shared that Liddy had absolutely no aptitude for being an adventurer. She explained that she had tried her absolute best to teach him magic, but to this day, Liddy couldn't even light a single match. Demoness also admitted that he had spent a great deal of time instructing Liddy in basic combat skills, but all his efforts were in vain. Liddy couldn't even use a simple dagger for self-defense. However, Farah cheerfully pointed out that Liddy had mastered social etiquette and the art of fine dining, which had to count for something, right? Even so, he still couldn't cast a single basic spell. Ignore expressed her opinion that Liddy had zero talent for anything combat-related, and that becoming an adventurer was the worst possible choice for him. She asked the group who was going to be the one to tell Liddy the bitter truth. Farah immediately refused, saying she couldn't do it, as she couldn't imagine putting Liddy through that kind of pain. Demoness yelled at the two women not to look his way, as they couldn't possibly expect an old man like him to break his own grandson's heart. But Ignore cut in, insisting that Demoness was the perfect person for the role. She told him to think about it. A soft-hearted grandfather having to speak the harsh truth of reality to protect his grandson from danger. Ignore went on to ask Demoness if he thought he was doing the right thing, stressing that the role had to be his, as he had lived longer and had more experience than she did. But to everyone's surprise, Rozark suddenly cut in, asking what the hell they were all arguing about. He said bluntly that if Liddy wanted to go down that path, then they should just let him do what he wants. The group was stunned and asked if Rozark was serious. Ignore yelled, criticizing how he could say something so irresponsible, and asked if he felt any shame. Farah added that it was too dangerous, while Demoness expressed that he thought at least one of them should go along to look after Liddy. Rozark shook his head, telling them they should reconsider. He pointed out that Liddy had grown up and it was time for him to leave the nest. Then, Rozark turned to ask Liddy if he was sure about his decision. Liddy replied that he had decided, but only if Rozark agreed. Rozark smiled and confirmed, saying that Liddy had his blessing. However, he added that he would only allow Liddy to become an adventurer on one condition, a condition he was sure Liddy would have no trouble fulfilling. Rozark patted Liddy's head, saying he had seen him do it once before, and he bet that he could overcome it by himself this time too. Rozark asked Liddy again for his decision, reminding him that a real man never goes back on his word. Liddy thought for a moment and then replied that he would do it, because he planned to one day catch up to Rozark and become the world's greatest adventurer. In the end, the whole group agreed to let Rozark lead and to move forward together. Afterward, Liddy thought to himself that it was time to start his own adventure. The 5 years he'd spent traveling with the Heroes Party were the best time of his life. All that time, he could only admire them from afar, always being sheltered and protected. But now, things would be different. He was going to become a real adventurer. Liddy felt a rush of excitement, seeing this as the start of the adventuring career he had always dreamed of. But just as he took his first step, a voice rang out, yelling for Liddy to stop. Liddy tensed up, turned around, and asked if they needed something from him. Seeing them, Liddy asked in surprise who they were, since he didn't think he had ever met them before. The group began to laugh and mock Liddy, asking if he thought he was trying to act cool, and if he really thought he could just walk away scot-free. A girl in the group shouted, telling him he wasn't getting away, and asked if he was a porter. Liddy replied that he was and asked why they wanted to know. The girl continued, saying she noticed he wasn't with anyone despite being a porter, which meant there was no one nearby to guard the haul he brought back from the mountains. She angrily demanded that Liddy hand over all the treasure, promising she would let him go without hurting him. Seeing them act this way, Liddy asked them to hold on, saying they sounded a lot like bandits. Hearing that, the girl asked if he'd really only just realized that. She then told him to hurry up and comply if he didn't want to get hurt. Liddy looked shocked as he realized they were robbers. He began to circle them, saying that they really were bandits, and that it had probably been years since he'd run into a group like this. Liddy shared that his party had become so famous that partway through their journey, people just stopped coming after them. The bandit girl confusedly asked what he was talking about. Liddy then said that this made him realize he was truly starting his own adventure. He apologized for forgetting about that and asked if they needed something from him. The bandit girl shouted in anger, saying Liddy had some nerve, but if he thought they wouldn't touch him just because he was young, he was dead wrong. She told him to forget it and lunged at Liddy to attack. The scene shifts back to Rozark and his comrades. Ignore said she couldn't help but worry about Liddy and wondered if he would really be okay. Rozark told her not to worry so much, but Ignore angrily snapped, asking how he could possibly say that. Demoness added that Liddy was, after all, just a porter. Farah said that Liddy had no real combat or magic skills, and she was worried something terrible might happen if some thugs targeted him. Hearing all of this, Rozark burst out laughing and said that they had really lost touch with the real world during their journey. Demoness asked confusedly what he meant by that. Rozark again asked everyone to trust him, because Liddy would be fine. Ignore shouted angrily, demanding Rozark explain where all his confidence was coming from. Rozark urged Ignore to calm down, insisting that he wasn't just spouting nonsense because he knew for a fact that Liddy would be all right. Meanwhile, he started to describe Liddy, and at the same time, a parallel scene was unfolding elsewhere. Rozark said that it was true Liddy was a porter and had no real fighting ability, but what everyone was forgetting was that Liddy was the hero's porter. At the same time, on the other side, Liddy was attacked by the bandits, but to everyone's surprise, he effortlessly dodged the blow. Rozark continued, saying that a porter's #1 job is to ensure the party's items don't get damaged during a fight, and Liddy had done that perfectly throughout their entire journey. Rozark asked if they had forgotten that they had once faced the Demon King and his entire army. He reminded everyone that even though Liddy didn't fight directly, it didn't mean he wasn't dealing with collateral damage. The Demon King's army rained tens of thousands of arrows on them at one point, and then there was the time they fought a dragon that leveled the surrounding landscape with its breath. Yet Liddy had kept all of the party's equipment completely safe through all those battles. In fact, it was that very skill that allowed Liddy to so easily dodge the bandit girl's attacks. The confused bandit girl asked what was happening, not understanding why none of her attacks were hitting Liddy. Liddy, getting stressed, told them to stop and said he needed to get going. In reality, it was all thanks to Liddy's support skill called Evasion, which was now at level 79. Liddy once again reminded them that robbery is a crime, and they should stop immediately. While Liddy was talking, a bald bandit lunged at him from behind. But by the time Liddy turned around, it was too late. He was hit. The scene cuts back to the hero party, where Farah asked what would happen if Liddy couldn't dodge an enemy attack. Rozark replied that nobody's perfect, and everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Liddy might slip up once, and something could hit the party's cargo that he couldn't dodge in time. But when that happens, Liddy will use his own body as a shield. In fact, Liddy has a skill called Endurance at level 85. So when the bald bandit hit him with a club, the club shattered. The tense bald bandit asked, What the hell just happened? Liddy apologized for the broken club, and the bald bandit was even more shocked to see that Liddy was completely unharmed. Liddy then asked the two bandits if they understood that doing bad things would get them nowhere in life. He advised them to stop robbing innocent travelers. Both bandits seemed a bit bewildered by Liddy's words. Liddy then pulled out a knife and said that if they continued with their plan, he would have to teach them a lesson. The bald bandit tensed up. But just then, Liddy accidentally cut his own finger because his combat skill was only at level 0, and he realized that using a knife was still too difficult for him. So, for now, he figured he needed to do something scary enough to make the bandits give up being robbers for good. Suddenly, Liddy remembered something. The scene cuts back to the hero party, where Demoness asked about the times Liddy had to defeat enemies. He pointed out that you can't just defend and expect to get out of every confrontation unscathed. Rozark asked if they were serious, saying that was the last thing they needed to worry about. He explained that a porter's job is to carry the group's goods, not to fight. Rozark continued, saying they had defeated golems and killed dragons, and since most of their body parts were valuable, they always tried to bring back as much as possible. Rozark asked the group again, who was the one able to carry those boulders and even the entire dragon on his back? He added that it was Liddy, and as far as they knew, he was probably the #1 weightlifter in the world. When the scene cut back to Liddy, the bandits were completely stunned by something. They were astounded because Liddy had just effortlessly lifted a giant boulder the size of a house. This was thanks to his support skill called Backpacker, which was at level 99. The bandits, in disbelief, asked him who on earth he was. Liddy smiled and calmly replied that he was the porter for the hero's party. Hearing this, the bandits were both stunned and terrified, and they begged Liddy to spare them. Without hesitation, they started to run away. Just then, Liddy yelled, demanding they swear to never rob innocent travelers again. Once the bandits had fled, Liddy smiled and set the boulder back on the ground. The scene cuts back to Rozark, who said that while Liddy didn't fight directly in the battles against the Demon King's army, they shouldn't be mistaken. Liddy was incredibly strong. It's like how a hero becomes the world's greatest adventurer. Being a porter for heroes made Liddy the world's strongest porter. Rozark added that from now on, it was time for Liddy to start his own adventure, and he couldn't be more excited to see him succeed. The scene shifts to the next day in the Casimir Kingdom, specifically the provincial city of Thikar. This was one of the human towns located near the Demon King's castle, serving as the first line of defense against any monster invasions. Despite its proximity to monster territory, the city had never let a single monster cross its borders, and it had stood strong as a fortress against the Demon King's army for the past 10 years. When Liddy arrived in the kingdom, he was incredibly surprised to see that everyone seemed to be holding a huge party in the city. He figured that news of the hero's victory over the Demon King must have reached the people here. This was likely thanks to Farah's magic. Her messengers had spread the word everywhere, and the news of their victory spread like wildfire. As the news reached the farthest corners of the world, this could truly be an era of peace. In the kingdom, children were running, playing, and cheering that they were the heroes. This sight made Liddy feel incredibly happy, because they had truly brought peace to everyone. Liddy wondered if he could ever hope to achieve something like they did. However, he remembered Rozark's words about becoming the world's greatest adventurer, so he decided it was time to take the first step. And this very town would be where his journey as an adventurer began. The scene shifts to some time later, at the Thikar Adventurers Guild, where Liddy asked in surprise why the guild couldn't accept his registration. The receptionist replied, asking if Liddy really needed to ask. The fact was, Liddy's archery skill was 0. Your swordsmanship skill is also a 0. And even your magic skill is a 0. The receptionist explained that he hadn't passed any of the 3 required basic exams. She added that the life of an adventurer was dangerous, and Liddy would be in grave danger if he went out like this. Hearing these words, Liddy was completely shocked and exclaimed that it couldn't be true. Suddenly, he remembered that he had a letter of recommendation in his pocket. To be honest, Liddy hadn't wanted to use it, but now he had no other choice since he couldn't afford to fail before even stepping out the door. The receptionist was getting tired of the situation, but she still had to look over the letter. When she opened the letter, the receptionist was astonished to see the signatures of Rozark the hero, Ignor the sage, Demoness the warrior, and Farah the priest. She asked Liddy in surprise who on earth he was. Liddy was about to answer, but before he could say anything, the receptionist shrieked, asking if he had forged the letter. Liddy tensely replied that he hadn't. Just then, another voice rang out, telling the receptionist not to jump to conclusions. When the receptionist looked toward the voice, she saw it was Guildmaster Zornius. He asked her to let him see the letter. The receptionist handed it over, still insisting that it was a fake. After reading the letter, Zornius asked the receptionist if she remembered what the hero had told him when he once visited the city. The scene shifts to Zornius talking with Rozark, where Zornius tells Rozark that if there was anything he needed from the guild, he should let them know, and they would spare no expense to support him in the fight against the Demon King. The Adventurers Guild is the only organization founded with the goal of eliminating the threat of monsters. Their mission and their very reason for existing is to support Rozark under any circumstances. Rozark turned his head, smiled, and asked Zornius if that was his only reason. He continued, saying that being an adventurer isn't just a journey to destroy enemies, but a ceaseless exploration that makes his heart pound with every step. Even though he knew he shouldn't say it, especially when the whole world was waiting for them, Rozark couldn't hide the joy he found in every adventure. Even if there was no Demon King threatening the world, who said they had to stop adventuring just because peace had returned? That's why, someday when that time comes, everyone will need Zornius and the guild's help. Rozark added that after defeating the Demon King and bringing peace to the land, he hoped Zornius and the guild would nurture true adventurers. The scene shifts back to the present, where Zornius tells Liddy and the receptionist that it's only been a few days since the Demon King was defeated, and things are just starting to stabilize. Zornius continued, saying that it might still be too early to say for sure that the world was completely free from external threats. But he could be certain that the hero, Sir Rozark, wished for a world where anyone could become an adventurer. And he shared that wish. Zornius then announced to Liddy that he was personally approving his registration. Liddy would start at rank F, the lowest in the guild. Zornius also reminded him that he expected Liddy not to let him down. Liddy joyfully replied, promising to do his best and thanking the guildmaster. Afterwards, Liddy began to celebrate while Zornius headed inside. However, the receptionist hurried after Zornius with more questions. She asked Zornius if he was really going to let the boy risk his life like that. Zornius replied that no, that wasn't how it was going to be, adding that the boy was not a child anymore. The receptionist was stunned to hear this. While Zornius had high hopes for Liddy, as he knew the boy had once been a young porter for the hero's party. The scene shifts to some time later, with Liddy looking at the quest he had received. His first quest was a delivery to the next town before sunrise. After reading it, Liddy was thrilled because this was an easy job for him. It was no different from his work as a porter, but this was his important first step on the path to becoming an adventurer, so he couldn't mess it up. Liddy shouted, resolving that he would get this package to its destination safely, or he'd never become a true adventurer. He stood up and hoisted the crate onto his back, but just as he lifted it, he heard someone cry out. Startled, Liddy put the box down and opened it to see what was inside. He was surprised to find a girl and a baby dragon inside. He realized that the cargo he was supposed to deliver was actually the girl. The girl told Liddy not to mind her, saying she was just an item to be delivered. Liddy was stunned to see an item that could talk. He replied that he didn't believe her, saying she was trying to smuggle herself out of town by filing a delivery request. Hearing this, the girl's expression changed, and she did not look pleased at all. Liddy then told the girl she couldn't do that, as the guild has different procedures for escort and delivery quests. He told her to go back and submit the proper request. The girl was silent for a moment. Liddy whispered that he was quite surprised by how calm she was. He asked her how she could be so composed, noting that even though the dragon was small, it was still a dragon. Liddy thought about how rare dragons were in this region, and remembered fighting dragons that had flocked from all over, so he'd gotten used to the idea of them existing. The girl then spoke up, feigning that he must be a seasoned adventurer to remain so calm in this situation. If that was the case, she wanted to make a direct request. She knew it was a big ask, but could he please help her get to her destination? She put on a pitiful face and begged for Liddy's help. Liddy replied that this was against regulations. But suddenly, to his surprise, the girl saw something and hurriedly hid inside the box. Liddy, confused, asked why the girl was hiding in the box and what was going on. Just then, a boy named Raka called out to Liddy, asking if he had seen a little girl pass by, carrying a small dragon. Liddy asked Raka what he planned to do with the girl if he found her, and whether she was related to him. At that moment, a deep voice from Raka cut Liddy off, telling him not to bother and to just answer what Raka asked. Raka told Raka to let him do the talking. Then, Raka explained to Liddy that the girl was a nobleman, and they had been tasked with bringing her back unharmed. Raka leaned in close to Liddy and said in a soft voice that he would ask one last time, had he seen the girl with the dragon in this neighborhood? Hearing this, the girl in the box began to tremble violently. At that moment, Liddy remembered a question he had once asked Rozark about how to decide whether to help someone. Rozark smiled and asked if he really needed to ask that question. Then, Rozark said with confidence that a true adventurer always sides with the righteous girls. In that moment, Ignore yelled, jokingly telling Rozark to stop teaching Liddy bad things. The scene shifts back to the present, where Liddy informs everyone that he hasn't seen any girl. Roka asked if that was true. Liddy then lifted the box onto his shoulder and said he had to go, apologizing for not being able to help. Roka suddenly asked Liddy about the things he was carrying in the box. Liddy replied that it was just some goods he needed to deliver. Roka asked Liddy again how much he was asking for the goods, as he was willing to buy them. Liddy replied that he was delivering it as part of a quest, so it wasn't necessary. Roka asked again if Liddy understood what he was saying. Liddy, a bit confused, replied that he was pretty sure he understood. Roka angrily shouted that Liddy didn't understand, and demanded that he hand over the box immediately, or else Liddy would face severe consequences. Roka lunged at Liddy with a punch, but Liddy easily dodged it, causing Roka to slam into the wall. Roka cried out in pain from the hard impact with the wall, and Liddy quickly asked if he was okay. Roka screamed that Liddy had broken his arm. His anger flaring, Roka ordered his companions to kill Liddy immediately. But before anyone could act, Liddy had already dashed off. Everyone tried to attack, but Liddy easily avoided every blow. The men roared in frustration, wondering why they couldn't hit this boy, and questioned who this kid was. As Liddy started to run away, Roka yelled, ordering everyone to chase after him and not let that brat escape. However, by the time Roka finished speaking, Liddy had already run a considerable distance. Everyone was stunned, realizing that Liddy was no ordinary child. Roka quickly dismissed everyone's concerns, saying there was nothing to worry about. Liddy was just a kid, and they needed to catch up to him. When Liddy reached the end of the alley, he saw a group of soldiers blocking the way. Realizing he had to turn back, he was surprised to see Roka and his henchmen approaching from behind. Roka laughed loudly, saying that the entire city was surrounded by walls, and asked Liddy if he really thought he could sneak out through the gates that were locked at night. Roka taunted Liddy, saying he had nowhere to go now. Then he yelled, demanding that Liddy pay the price for breaking his arm, and promised to break every single bone in his body. Hearing this, Liddy thought to himself that Roka had done it to himself. He also thought that he could run back to the guild, but it would exceed the time limit for the quest. Liddy didn't want to cause trouble for the other adventurers, so he needed to find another way out. Suddenly, Liddy looked up at the wall, then gently tapped on the box. The girl in the box peeked her head out a little, telling Liddy that he could just hand her over to them. In fact, she insisted that they couldn't be put in any more danger. Liddy told her to be quiet and keep her head down for a moment. The girl looked at him, her face full of confusion. Liddy reassured her, telling her not to worry, saying he would never let them have her. Liddy smiled, adding that she was his precious cargo, and keeping his deliveries safe was the one thing he was good at. The girl stared at Liddy for a moment, a hint of surprise on her face, unable to look away from him. Meanwhile, Raka and his henchmen were closing in on Liddy, ready to attack. Without a moment's hesitation, Liddy picked up the box and used his throw skill level 66, launching it over the wall. Everyone was stunned, wondering what the hell Liddy was doing and how he could throw something so far. They wondered if he was planning to take the girl down with him. As everyone's attention was fixed on the box, Liddy activated his sprint skill, level 72, and dashed towards the city gate, weaving through the dumbfounded crowd. The crowd was shocked by Liddy's speed, but they soon realized what was happening, wondering if he was actually going to break through the gate to escape. Outside the city gate, the guards stared at the box in confusion, having no idea what it was. Just then, Liddy burst through, smashing the city gate as he fled. He shouted an apology to the guards as he zipped past them. Even the guards couldn't get a clear look, left only with their confusion at what had just happened. Suddenly, the girl in the small dragon tumbled out of the box. As she realized she was falling, she screamed in terror. To her surprise, Liddy was right there to catch her in his arms. Liddy asked if she was okay, apologizing and asking if she was hurt. The girl replied that she was fine, just a little startled. Liddy then caught the box, placed the girl back inside and slung it over his shoulder. Liddy said it was time to go before their pursuers caught up. The girl apologized to Liddy, saying her selfish actions had put him in such a dangerous situation. Liddy replied that it was fine, that she didn't need to feel guilty because it was his job to deliver her where she needed to go. He told her to just sit tight. The girl then asked Liddy if they were heading to the next town. Liddy said yes, explaining that it would be their first stop. The girl said that after the next town, they would continue south to Myrick, then to Hansville, Iltonia, and finally, Fenalicia. The girl asked Liddy if he could take her all the way to the kingdom of Fenalicia. Hearing this, Liddy was stunned and exclaimed, "Fenalicia?" The girl replied that she understood it was a huge request, but he was her only hope. She had no one else to trust but him. She begged for Liddy's help, insisting that she had to return to Fenalicia immediately and promised to compensate him handsomely for the job. Liddy asked her curiously why she was in such a hurry to get to Fenalicia. He added that Fenalicia was at the southern tip of the continent, the farthest kingdom from the border, and that the journey wouldn't be easy, not even for him. So he wanted to hear her reason first. The girl calmly replied that she was the princess of Fenalicia. Liddy, who at first thought that seemed plausible, suddenly realized what she'd just said and shouted in astonishment, "A princess?" The girl smiled and introduced herself, saying her name was Veronica Fenalicia and that she was the first princess of the kingdom of Fenalicia. After traveling a bit further, Liddy stopped by a large tree and told Veronica that he didn't think the thugs could find them here, so they should set up camp and rest for a day. Veronica apologized to Liddy for everything that had happened, saying she felt terrible for putting him in danger because of her. Liddy laughed and told her not to worry because he was just doing his job as a pseudo-adventurer. Suddenly, the dragon spoke up, telling Veronica that as a noble, she must act the part. The power of one's character, it said, is the ultimate and most powerful weapon of a royal. The dragon even advised Veronica to speak with more confidence. It then approached Liddy and asked if this was the first time he'd ever heard a dragon speak. The question seemed reasonable, as not everyone gets the chance to meet a legendary dragon. The dragon then told Liddy to cover his ears tightly because it was about to tell a story. But before it could speak, Liddy asked if it was a dragon of the Lexi species. The dragon was stunned, asking Liddy what he knew about its kind. Veronica then shared that for the past 5 years she had been studying at the Casimir Academy of Magic. She joined the academy because Casimir was at the forefront of magical research, despite being located near the Demon Lord's territory. However, she couldn't stay any longer, especially after what happened last year. Veronica explained that the king of Fenalicia, her father, was assassinated by an unknown assailant. Hearing this, Liddy was shocked and asked why the king was killed. Veronica replied that this truth had been kept secret throughout the war, as they didn't want to cause panic while dealing with the monsters. However, the dragon, named Yido, interrupted and said that now was the time to reveal the truth and for the rightful king to take the throne. But, Yido added, it wasn't that simple. The dragon then asked Liddy if he understood what it was saying. Liddy replied that someone was trying to stop Veronica from returning to the kingdom, but he wondered who would do such a thing. Liddy also mentioned a good reason to believe it was the second princess, Flora. She's Veronica's half-sister. Yido yelled that if Veronica wasn't around, Flora would be the one to inherit the throne. The goblin bet that Flora was involved in the king's assassination. However, Veronica stopped Yido, saying that couldn't be true as Flora was an incredibly kind person. She believed Flora would never plot to kill her own father just for the throne. Veronica also shared that right now she just wanted to find out what was really happening in the palace. She needed to know who was causing all this chaos and why. If Flora was being manipulated and working with the culprit, that would mean Flora was also in danger. So, Veronica once again asked Liddy if he could take her back to the kingdom. Liddy smiled and replied that, of course, Veronica could count on him. Yido was surprised to see that Liddy didn't hesitate at all, not even for a second. Yido asked Veronica if she was sure about Liddy, as he suspected Liddy might be trying to sell them to traffickers. Veronica replied that she thought Yido was being too rude to Liddy and they should at least trust him. Yido approached Liddy again, his face tense, and asked if he was truly ready for this journey. He acknowledged that Veronica would pay him a handsome reward when it was over, but also warned that the journey would be anything but easy. Liddy replied that he knew, but he still wanted to help, because that's what a hero would do in his position. Hearing this, Veronica was a bit confused, wondering why Liddy was talking about a hero. Liddy continued saying that besides, it's not every day you get to work with a princess on your first quest as a newbie, and he truly appreciated the opportunity she had given him. Veronica was overjoyed to hear that, but suddenly Yido realized something and urgently yelled for Liddy to stop, asking if he was really a newbie. Yido shouted at Veronica, insisting it wouldn't be okay because Liddy was a complete rookie. Veronica replied that she'd seen Liddy outrun all their pursuers while carrying them, so she was confident they'd be fine. Liddy also said he would do his best. The scene shifts to Raka and his henchmen, where Raka is furious that they lost Liddy so easily. One of Raka's men asked if he thought Liddy and the girl had gone far and might have set up camp nearby. He asked if Raka wanted him to assemble a pursuit team. Raka said no, stating there was no point anymore as their fates were sealed the moment they left the car. Zanamund was already targeting them. Hearing this, the henchman was surprised, asking if Raka was talking about the legendary assassin. Raka replied, yes, he was talking about the noble assassin, Zanamund. He also shared that Zanamund has a perfect kill rate, with no one surviving to tell the tale. He warned that it was best to stay away from the assassin, unless someone wanted to know what it feels like to breathe through a slit throat. Hearing this, all the henchmen were terrified and fell silent, not daring to say a word. Finally, Raka told them to go home. The henchmen were also upset because they weren't getting paid for what they'd done. The scene shifts back to Liddy and Veronica, who are both asleep. Suddenly, Liddy sensed something and woke up. Seeing Liddy wake up so abruptly, a nervous Veronica asked what was wrong. Liddy replied that someone was approaching them. Veronica tensed up and asked if it was their pursuers. Liddy shared that, from the sound of it, there seemed to be only one person. Liddy could tell this thanks to his hearing skill, which was at level 68. Right now, he could sense that the person was observing them from quite a distance. This person's skills were far superior to the henchmen who had chased them in Thikar, so Liddy thought they weren't in immediate danger. At this distance, the person would probably attack Veronica sooner or later, so Liddy decided to wait for them to make the first move. After they dealt with the first wave of attack, they would run for it. But before he could think any further, a magical cord shot towards Liddy and tied him up. By the time he realized he was the target, it was too late for Liddy to understand what was happening. Seeing this, both Veronica and Yido were in shock. Liddy felt tense as he hadn't expected this at all. He thought the other person would aim for Veronica directly. In fact, monsters and beasts usually target humans and ignore auxiliary members of the party, including the porter, and Liddy had never been targeted during any of his adventures. But this time they weren't up against a monster and he was no longer a porter. This was normal when fighting human enemies, to target the support or those in the back before attacking the main target. Liddy cursed himself for being so stupid, and realized this was what it felt like to fight as a real adventurer. Just then, Xanamund emerged from the forest, saying the ambush had gone more smoothly than he'd expected. He also shared that his intuition had warned him Liddy was highly capable, but it seemed he was wrong. His instincts weren't as sharp as they used to be. Yido anxiously urged Liddy to get up and demanded the assassin introduce himself. Xanamund replied that it was an honor to meet them, and introduced himself as Xanamund from the house of Erdish Barony. Xanamund also apologized for obstructing their journey, but he insisted that Veronica had been marked for death. Xanamund declared that he would be taking her life. Yido immediately jumped in to protect Veronica, launching an attack with a wave of ice. But Xanamund remarked that Yido certainly had an interesting acquaintance. He easily dodged the attack and countered with one of his own, lightly injuring Yido. Yido tensely told Veronica that it was hopeless, and they needed to run immediately. But Veronica, looking worried, asked Yido about Liddy, saying they couldn't just leave him behind like that. Seeing this, Liddy was surprised to realize that they couldn't escape because of him. Yido then said they had no other choice but to fight back, and advised Veronica to use her mana to defeat Xanamund. Veronica, with a sad and tense expression, refused, saying she couldn't do it because it would put Liddy's life in danger. Liddy immediately yelled for her not to worry about him, and demanded that she act now, or else the whole group would die. Veronica was still distraught, not knowing what to do, but Liddy kept yelling, begging her not to hesitate. Meanwhile, Xanamund closed in on Veronica, preparing to strike. Finally, she had no other choice but to use her power. As she began to focus her mana, Xanamund was surprised, wondering if she was casting a wind spell. However, upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't a spell. The girl was letting her mana run wild. She was unleashing all of it, creating a storm of pure destruction. Xanamund was stunned by her power, wondering how a single person could possess such a vast amount of mana. This was unprecedented, and he realized his barrier wouldn't be able to withstand the storm. A giant whirlwind erupted, crushing everything around Veronica. When the storm finally subsided, she sank to the ground in sorrow, feeling like a failure for not being able to control her mana. She felt a profound sadness, believing she had killed Yido and Liddy with her uncontrolled mana. Just as she was about to cry, she suddenly heard Liddy's voice telling her they were still alive. Veronica was surprised and overjoyed to see them both safe. Veronica bowed her head and apologized to Liddy for the chaos, then confessed the truth, that she had never been able to control her mana, no matter how much she studied. In fact, she wouldn't even dare call what she did a spell. She had simply released all the mana she possibly could. Yido cut in, saying that if Veronica thought he'd come here to learn how to control mana, she was mistaken. He hadn't seen any progress at all. Veronica asked Liddy in surprise how he managed to escape. Liddy replied that it was much simpler than she thought. The assassin dispelled the rope binding Liddy at the last minute, probably because Xanamund needed all his mana to defend against her attack. Liddy explained that he had dashed towards Yido just before the whirlwind swept through, and hid under the roots of a tree. Hearing this, Veronica was surprised, feeling that Liddy spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She realized that in that situation, making the right decision so quickly wasn't something just anyone could do, and that it was an incredible feat. She was even more surprised when she remembered Liddy had once said he was a rookie. Veronica apologized to Liddy for the incident, but she couldn't help but ask what he did before becoming an adventurer. Veronica asked again in surprise, "A porter for whom?" And Liddy smiled, explaining that he used to be a porter for Mr. Rozark's party, the Heroes' Party. Hearing this, both Veronica and Yido were stunned, unable to believe their ears, and asked Liddy if he was serious. The scene shifts to Xanamund, who is laughing loudly, thinking about the extraordinary power that girl possessed, the power that allowed her to escape him. Xanamund decided that he must have her, and with the sky as his witness, he swore he would take her life. He laughed again with glee at the thought. The scene shifts back to Liddy and Veronica, who have finally reached the Dawn River. Liddy pointed towards the river and told Veronica and Yido to look. Hearing that, Yido asked if this was the river with the bridge. Liddy nodded and explained that it was the indestructible bridge, built by order of the current king. At the time, many thought building it was impossible, but thanks to the help of skilled builders from all over, the bridge was completed after decades of effort. Then Liddy, without looking at the bridge himself, told them to behold the result of those long years of hard labor. The Great Dawn Bridge. However, both Veronica and Yido were stunned to see that the bridge had been destroyed. Veronica worriedly said to Liddy, "But I thought the bridge was supposed to be indestructible." Liddy replied that they were out of luck and would have to swim across. Ito, surprised, asked Liddy if he was serious, pointing out that if so, he would have to carry Veronica on his back. Ito then asked who could have done this, since this was supposed to be the sturdiest bridge around. Liddy was also pondering this with a curious look. At that moment, Veronica saw a group of people and asked if they were saying anything. Liddy replied that they might be villagers from the nearby town. Liddy used a hearing spell to listen in on them, then shared that the people were telling each other they should stay away from the riverbank. Suddenly, a creature emerged from the water. Upon seeing the creature, Veronica screamed that it was a sea serpent. Ito cried out that this thing was massive, even for a sea serpent. Liddy agreed, adding that he'd never seen one this huge before. Liddy thought that this monster must have been the one that destroyed the bridge. Suddenly, a voice rang out, demanding they surrender. Ito was stunned and shouted, unable to believe the sea serpent could talk. Veronica replied worriedly that it was telepathy. The serpent spoke again, this time demanding the man to surrender. Ito nervously told everyone to hold on, because the serpent was targeting Veronica. The serpent lunged at her, but Liddy quickly dashed forward and saved her just in time. Afterward, Liddy thought about the serpent's speed, despite its enormous size, and realized that if it could use telepathy, it could probably use magic too. Just then, Veronica noticed something in the serpent's eyes and yelled that something was coming. Just as she cried out, the serpent launched an Aqua Nova attack at them. Ito was clipped by the attack, but Liddy quickly pulled him out of the danger zone. Then, Liddy sprinted to escape the crashing waves. Ito shouted worriedly, asking what the sea serpent was doing here. Liddy replied that he didn't know either. Suddenly, Liddy noticed something and hurriedly pushed both Ito and Veronica away to protect them. He did it because the serpent was about to charge at them. Seeing this, both Ito and Veronica panicked, worried that Liddy would be killed. However, to the surprise of both Veronica and the sea serpent, Liddy managed to stop the serpent's charge. Ito, stunned, asked how Liddy could have stopped that attack, unable to believe Liddy's strength. Liddy ordered Veronica and Ito to run immediately. Ito shouted in protest, saying they couldn't just abandon Liddy, but Liddy yelled back at them to run now. He insisted that he could hold the serpent off for a while, but he couldn't defeat a monster that massive. Hearing this, both Veronica and Ito tensed up, calling out Liddy's name. Ito realized that Liddy was no ordinary person, even though he wasn't a warrior. Sure, Liddy had been through countless battles as an excellent porter, but he wasn't lying when he said he was just a rookie adventurer with no combat skills. Meanwhile, the serpent demanded to know who Liddy was, daring him to block its path. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared, surrounding Liddy and the serpent. Seeing this, Veronica realized it was an ancient magic circle. She screamed at Liddy, telling him to get out of there right now and to run away. Unexpectedly, a Terra Needle spell was used to attack the serpent, injuring it and leaving Veronica and Ito stunned. Liddy smiled and said that he recognized that spell. In fact, it was Ignore who had cast that spell on the serpent. She yelled about Rosark and his irresponsible words, insisting that they couldn't just leave Liddy behind alone. Liddy felt happy to see Ignore, and upon hearing her name, both Veronica and Ito were stunned, asking if she was the mage from the hero's party, the very same Ignore they had heard of. Immediately after, Ignore confronted the sea serpent by herself, using various spells to defeat it. Meanwhile, the sea serpent tried to escape. Liddy rushed over to hug Ignore, saying it had been a long time. Ignore replied, happy to see that Liddy was safe. Liddy then asked Ignore what she was doing here, and Ignore answered that she had some business to take care of in the area. Overhearing their conversation, Ito realized that Ignore was indeed the mage from the hero's party. This meant Liddy truly was their porter, and he hadn't been lying after all. Ito then turned to Veronica to ask if she was listening, but realized that Veronica was completely mesmerized by Ignore's magical abilities. Veronica thought Ignore's magic was like a work of art. The way she cast powerful spells one after another without any incantations, with such precise control over every detail and without even needing to draw a magic circle, Veronica had no doubt that this girl was the talented mage Miss Ignore. Then, Ignore turned to Liddy and asked about his relationship with the girl, demanding that he be honest. Liddy replied that Veronica was one of his adventuring companions. Ignore immediately retorted, saying Veronica was too cute to be just an adventuring companion, that it couldn't possibly be just that. She added that Veronica looked like she came from a very wealthy family. Ignore then asked Liddy if Veronica was a noble and why he had brought her along with him. Liddy was about to answer when Ignore cut him off, insisting that it couldn't possibly be true. Ignore expressed that she really didn't want to believe it, and asked Liddy if he had stolen Veronica from her home so they could run away together. Liddy gently suggested to Veronica and Yido that they should wait until Miss Ignore calmed down. He explained that Ignore was very smart, but sometimes she overthought things and jumped to the wrong conclusions. Veronica replied that she understood, while Ignore continued shouting to herself about what to tell Demoness and Pharaoh when she met them, insisting that everything was Rosark's fault. The scene transitions to a few minutes later where Liddy and Veronica are explaining everything to Ignore. After understanding the situation, Ignore told Liddy it seemed like he'd taken on another troublesome delivery job. Liddy smiled and replied that yes, it was the only thing he was good at. Ignore then asked Liddy how he'd been, and if life as an adventurer was treating him well. Liddy replied that he wasn't sure if it was good, but being an adventurer was a lot harder than he had imagined. He went on to tell Ignore that they had just narrowly escaped an assassination attempt by someone. Liddy had forgotten the person's name and asked Veronica. Veronica answered that if she remembered correctly, his name was Zanamund. Hearing the name Zanamund, Ignore was stunned and tensely asked if they were talking about that noble assassin. Liddy replied that yes, he thought Zanamund had called himself that. Ignore started to panic, telling Liddy that the man was a menace and that he would be in grave danger if he ran into Zanamund again, especially since Liddy had no combat skills. Ignore added that even she would have a hard time facing Zanamund alone, so she decided she had no choice but to go with Liddy, otherwise he'd just get himself killed. A moment later, Ignore realized something and asked Liddy that if Zanamund had already attacked them, how were they still standing in front of her? Liddy replied that he was glad Ignore asked, then shared that it was all thanks to Veronica, because her amazing magic had stopped Zanamund and saved them. Hearing this, Veronica started to blush, hastily asking Liddy what he was talking about. In a panic, Veronica cried out for Liddy to stop, asking if he was trying to embarrass her in front of Lady Ignore. Ignore, curious, asked Veronica what she meant by that. Veronica replied that unfortunately it wasn't real magic. She had just let her mana go out of control. At that, Veronica sadly apologized and bowed her head to Ignore. After hearing Veronica's words, Ignore asked again if she had said she studied at Thekar, pointing out that the instructors there were clearly excellent. Veronica tensely replied that yes, it was probably because she had no talent for magic. Ignore thought for a moment and then asked Veronica to take her hand. Veronica, confused, took Ignore's hand and wondered what was happening. In that moment, Ignore used some kind of spell to investigate something. After a minute, Ignore opened her eyes and exclaimed that she knew it all along. No wonder the instructors there couldn't teach Veronica anything. Liddy curiously asked Ignore what it was. Ignore replied that she had something to tell both Veronica and Liddy. She then told Veronica that she had an abundant amount of mana but couldn't control her magic. As for Liddy, Ignore said that while he was a good porter, he had no way of fighting back against his enemies. With such a hopeless party composition, she doubted Liddy could get much further, let alone complete his journey. In fact, things had been snuffed out from the very beginning, all thanks to their encounter with Zanamund. At that moment, Yido looked at Ignore curiously, wondering what she thought of him. However, Veronica shouted that no matter what, they still had to reach their intended destination. Ignore cut them off, saying she would give them a quest. Hearing this, everyone was stunned and shouted in unison, asking what kind of quest it was. Ignore reassured them that if they could overcome their weaknesses, they would be able to solve their main problems. She repeated that, as mentioned before, they both had clear weaknesses. Liddy couldn't be allowed to continue this dangerous journey in his current state. However, if Veronica and Liddy worked together, they could compensate for each other's weaknesses. Ignore then shared that, for this quest, she wanted the two of them to defeat the sea serpent within 1 hour. Liddy asked in surprise if Ignore really wanted them to defeat the sea serpent. Veronica, panicking, asked how they could possibly do that. Ignore, not hearing Veronica's question, turned back to Liddy and asked if he could do it. Obviously, this quest was far beyond his capabilities, but Liddy still wanted to try. Even if the chances of winning were incredibly low, he still wanted to take on the challenge. That was the kind of determination an adventurer needed to have. Ignore then turned to Veronica and said she would explain why Veronica couldn't control her mana, but first, Ignore asked Veronica if one of her ancestors was an elf. Hearing this question, Yido exclaimed in disbelief, arguing that Veronica was the princess of a human kingdom, and that it couldn't possibly be true. He added that if this news were to leak out, it would cause serious trouble. However, Veronica told Yido to stop and explained that, according to legend, the king from 4 generations ago, Idnil, the king of expeditions, was actually the son of a nameless concubine of the previous king. Ignore immediately cut in and revealed that the concubine was actually an elf, and children born between humans and elves are always blessed with mystical powers. This perfectly explained Veronica's condition. Veronica's immense mana was a result of her mixed elven and human blood. Hearing that, Veronica curiously asked if she really had elven blood in her. Ignore moved closer to Veronica and said that, in terms of mana levels alone, Veronica might even surpass her, which meant she was truly blessed. Ignore further explained that Veronica's poor control was due to her magic circle. Magic circles are magical constructs created by the user's mana to control magic. With an abundant amount of mana like Veronica's, no normal level magic circle could withstand it, causing it to break and her spells to go out of control. Ignore then said that normally she would teach Veronica how to create a more robust magic circle to handle her immense mana. But this wasn't something Veronica could learn in a single day. Hearing this, Veronica sadly replied that she felt very disappointed in herself. Even though Liddy had tried his best to help her, and now she even had Lady Ignore's guidance, she still felt like she couldn't do anything in return. And that was just too cruel. Ignore smiled and said that Veronica was perfectly capable of doing it. Since your problem stems from your bloodline, elven-related issues require elven solutions. Ignore then asked Liddy to pay attention, emphasizing that the success of this mission depended entirely on him. Liddy, confused, asked what this had to do with him. The scene then shifts to the shore of the Dawn River, where Liddy and the others were standing on the shore. People from a nearby village tried to warn them about the sea serpent, but Liddy apologized for causing trouble and explained that they were preparing to face the serpent. Hearing this, the astonished villagers asked if he was insane. Ignore explained that this sea serpent monster lived by absorbing mana, and with Veronica in the group, it was certain to appear again. Therefore, they needed to stay vigilant. Veronica replied that she understood. At that moment, Yido, a little annoyed with Ignore, said that he initially thought she was an intelligent and beautiful person. But then she came up with such a dangerous plan, making him wonder if all elves were that cruel. Ignore replied that she thought she had been very kind by guiding them, perhaps even coddling them too much. But could they really blame her? After all, when an artisan sees a diamond in the rough, they naturally want to polish it to make it shine brighter. And right now, I'm holding 2 large diamonds in my hands. Just then, the sea serpent appeared. Seeing it, Ignore shouted that everything now depended on Liddy and Veronica, encouraging them to give it their all. Right then, Liddy reviewed the plan with Veronica and said, "Let's do this." Veronica responded with a firm nod. As Liddy and Veronica began their task, Yido jumped into the fray, declaring that he would support them. Yido tried to distract the serpent and draw its attention to ease the pressure on Liddy. However, it wasn't long before the serpent quickly forced Yido to retreat. Seeing Yido in danger, Veronica cried out in alarm. Liddy explained that Yido was buying them time by distracting the serpent, so they couldn't waste the opportunity he had created. Then he told Veronica that he was about to start sprinting. Veronica replied that she was ready. In fact, Liddy was running with Veronica on his back, while she used her magic to draw a large magic circle. Veronica carefully remembered the instructions, drawing each line slowly and precisely. The story flashes back to a little earlier when Ignore explained that they would be using a method that elves often teach their children when they first start learning magic. Ignore shared that elves teach their children to run in a circle while drawing a giant magic circle in the air. She further explained that the durability of a magic circle depends on its strength and size. As long as the magic circle is large enough, even a novice can use it to unleash powerful spells. Ignore added that she would bet this method wasn't taught at the Human Academy because ordinary people don't have enough mana to exceed the limits of a magic circle. For Veronica to handle her immense amount of mana, she needed to draw an extremely large magic circle. She had to make it as large as humanly possible. The story returns to the present, where the sea serpent has caught the scent of Liddy and Veronica, making Yido tense up. The sea serpent lunged to attack, causing Ignore to scream at Liddy to keep running. She reminded him that the magic circle didn't have to be a perfect circle. It was enough, as long as the lines in the air formed an arc. Ignore also yelled at Veronica, telling her to stay focused and not to break the line, or the magic circle would be nullified. "Okay!" Liddy and Veronica replied in unison and began to focus intently. Meanwhile, Ignore whispered to herself, cursing Rosark as an insufferable fool, a brute and a scoundrel who didn't know when to stop joking. But, she admitted, The one good thing about Rosark was that he never lied. Meanwhile, Liddy was dodging every attack from the serpent by moving in a zigzag pattern. He turned his head back to ask Veronica if she was okay and if he was shaking her around too much. Veronica replied that she was fine. Liddy then shouted encouragingly, "You can do this!" and urged her to show everyone the results of her relentless efforts. He reminded her that she had spent the last 5 years studying magic, which was almost as long as he had been dreaming of becoming an adventurer. Liddy placed his absolute trust in Veronica, saying that if anyone could do this, it was definitely her. Filled with confidence, Veronica shouted, "I'll definitely do it!" Meanwhile, the sea serpent began to create a binding magic circle, making Yido tense up as he realized that both Liddy and Veronica were trapped, unable to escape its jaws. Just then, Liddy shouted at the snake, telling it that it couldn't catch them that easily and to never underestimate a porter from the hero's party. With that, he leaped into the air using his level 96 jump skill. At the same time, Veronica hoped the magic lines she was drawing would connect successfully. Finally, she was able to link the lines, forming a complete circle. Seeing this, Yido was stunned, realizing that Veronica had finally done it. With the sea serpent now right over the magic circle, Liddy yelled that it was all up to her to finish it, wishing her good luck. Ignore congratulated Veronica on properly completing her first spell, and advised her that she didn't need to use any complex incantations for this first time. She encouraged Veronica, telling her to start with the basics. Veronica began to chant, "O spirits of ice, hear my plea, summon the enveloping chill, and freeze all that stands in my way." Meanwhile, the sea serpent was also preparing to unleash its Aqua Nova attack. Seeing this, Yido tensed up, realizing the situation was extremely dangerous because the sea serpent was using its own high-level magic. Just then, Veronica completed her spell, Icy Breeze, a level 1 spell, to counter the serpent's level 49 attack. As the two spells clashed, Veronica worried about the outcome. To everyone's surprise, the sea serpent's entire body was completely frozen by Veronica's spell. After being frozen, the serpent fell into the river. Witnessing this, both Liddy and Veronica burst out in joy, realizing they had succeeded. Yido was also astonished, unable to believe that Liddy and Veronica had actually taken down the sea serpent. He even told Liddy to look, saying they could do anything if they dared to try. Liddy humbly replied that he didn't think he'd done much, feeling like he'd just been running around in circles. Veronica quickly cut in, telling him not to downplay his own worth, emphasizing that they couldn't have succeeded without him. Ignore also agreed with Veronica, stating that creating such a huge magic circle while being targeted by an enemy was nearly impossible. She stressed that this achievement was only possible thanks to Liddy's excellent mobility. Afterward, Ignore announced that both Liddy and Veronica had passed the test, praising them for excellently using their individual strengths to cover for each other's weaknesses. They were both overjoyed and thanked Ignore for her help. The villagers were also thrilled because the sea serpent had now become a makeshift bridge, which they saw as a true miracle. Some even praised Liddy and Veronica for not only defeating the sea serpent that had terrorized the region, but also creating a new bridge for the village. The entire village thanked Liddy and Veronica for their help. Hearing these words of gratitude, Liddy was moved to tears. This made Yido laugh and tease him, asking why he was bawling his eyes out like that, and that a man shouldn't cry in public. Veronica quickly told Yido to stop teasing Liddy. Liddy just laughed and apologized for crying. Ignore admitted that Rosark was right, that Liddy truly was special, and that his positivity brought hope to everyone around him. She thought that without a doubt, Liddy would become a great adventurer in the future. As things began to settle down, Liddy asked Ignore if she wanted to travel with them for a while. Ignore thanked him for the offer, saying she'd love to join, but unfortunately, she couldn't, as she had a small matter to take care of first. Veronica then timidly stepped up to Ignore and expressed her gratitude. She thanked Ignore profusely, explaining that she was able to cast her first ever spell. Veronica added that she believed it was all thanks to Ignore's wonderful guidance, and she would always cherish this experience. Ignore, feeling a bit weary of the emotional display, told Veronica not to get so worked up, saying she only taught her the basics. Finally, Ignore said her goodbyes to everyone. Before leaving, Ignore said that she would always be cheering them on in their journey ahead. She encouraged them to be confident in their path and expressed her belief that they would be able to overcome any challenge that lay before them. Liddy and Veronica cheerfully declared that they definitely would. As Ignore turned to leave, she told herself that she'd done the right thing by not dragging Liddy and Veronica, the adventurers of the new era, into this fight. She thought that whether the Monster Lord was still alive or not, The problems of the old era were a matter for the adventurers of the previous generation. This implied that the monster lord had not been defeated, and perhaps Ignore had come to take Liddy with her, but she quickly dismissed that thought. The scene changes to the kingdom of Fenalicia, where a guard announces that it is time to receive the acting queen. Princess Flora declares to everyone that today she will welcome her husband and officially assume the throne as the Queen of Fenalicia. The crowd is taken aback, wondering if Flora is really getting married and becoming queen. Flora explains that with the king being gravely ill, he has decided he can no longer continue his duties and wishes to appoint a successor to the throne. Flora adds that she wishes to fulfill the king's final wish before it's too late, and despite her inexperience, Flora asks for everyone's support as she officially becomes the Queen of Fenalicia. At first, everyone was silent, but then they suddenly started cheering for Flora, wishing her a long life as queen. Then Flora introduced her fiancé, whose name was Mac. When Mac entered the court, he complimented Flora on her excellent royal speech. Flora smiled and thanked Mac for the compliment. Mac proceeded to ask everyone to begin the conference. Suddenly, a warrior from the kingdom arrived and demanded the conference be stopped. Mac replied that, if he recalled correctly, this man must be Sir Schwartz, right? He remarked that this was the first time Schwartz had come to the capital in a whole year. Just then, Schwartz turned and shouted that he had to ask a question, asking if everyone really saw no problem with Mac brazenly seizing the king's throne. He questioned everyone, asking who Mac thought he was to dare do such a thing. Schwartz went on to say that first, Mac appeared unannounced, and then introduced himself with a name that even Schwartz had never heard of. He asked what Mac thought he was. Schwartz continued to raise his voice, asking why no one in the kingdom had spoken up to criticize Mac's actions. He declared that Mac's purpose was clear. He was trying to usurp the king's throne. At that moment, the surrounding space was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. All eyes were fixed on Schwartz, and no one dared to speak. Schwartz asked in surprise, "What's wrong? Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Suddenly, Mac stepped up behind Schwartz and clapped, complimenting him on his excellent declaration and praising Schwartz's bravery. Schwartz was stunned, not realizing when Mac had moved behind him. Mac approached Schwartz, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said that Schwartz was completely different from the rest, who only knew how to follow orders. He acknowledged that Schwartz had the courage to criticize things he felt were out of place. Mac added that it was an excellent quality in times of war. Immediately after, Mac suddenly attacked Schwartz, declaring that people like Schwartz have no place in an era of peace. After Schwartz was killed, Mac returned to sit on the throne and asked if anyone else had any objections before they continued. Seeing the murderous aura radiating from Mac, everyone was terrified and fell silent. Suddenly, a girl tried to speak up, saying she had a report for His Majesty. Marie, the head of national security, smiled at Mac and asked what he wanted to know. She apologized for bearing bad news, explaining that the security team had been unable to secure Princess Veronica in Thikar. Marie reported that Princess Veronica had escaped, and her current whereabouts were unknown. She feared that Veronica might be on her way back to the kingdom. Upon hearing this, the entire crowd was astonished. Mac remarked that this seemed like a serious problem and asked Flora what they should do. However, Flora looked at Marie with a furious glare. Seeing Flora's furious glare, Marie was frightened and began to tremble. Flora then immediately asked how that could have happened. Marie nervously replied, saying she was just reporting the situation. Flora yelled that she didn't need any reports. She just wanted results, and only results. She told Marie that if she couldn't complete such a simple task, then it would be best to find someone else to take Marie's place. Hearing this, Marie was completely stunned with fear. She bowed before Flora and said she would immediately arrange a new captor team, and begged Flora to give her one more chance. Mac laughed loudly, saying that was quite an impressive performance. Flora assured him it wasn't just a performance, because she would absolutely not let Veronica take the throne. The scene shifts to Liddy and Veronica, who are fishing. Veronica struggled and struggled, but couldn't catch a single fish, which led Yido to advise her to just give up, since not everyone is born a master fisherman. Veronica asked Yido if he was saying she was useless at fishing. In fact, her fishing skill was only level 1. Veronica shared that she believed the key to being a successful fisherman was patience. She had read it in a book, so she knew. Yido then asked why she didn't take a look at Liddy's results. When Veronica looked over, she was surprised to see that Liddy had caught a lot of fish. Liddy cheerfully said that he'd caught a whole bunch, and his success was thanks to his fishing skill, which was currently at level 76. Besides that, Liddy also found a lot of fruit using his gathering skill, which is currently at level 71. Afterwards, he cooked using his level 88 cooking skill. Liddy made a dish called longtail fish aquapazza, along with plenty of vegetables and a vegetable soup. He invited both Veronica and Yido to have some. Seeing the food, both Yido and Veronica were amazed, and after eating, they praised how delicious it was. Liddy replied that he was glad they liked it,